Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
This is Professor David Loertscher at the School of Information, San Jose State University. And it is my honor today to introduce you to a great colleague, Sue Kowalski. Sue, would you introduce yourself and describe, how you got into education in the first place?
Yeah, my name is Sue Kowalski. I'm honored to be here as well. I live in Brewerton, New York, which is a northern suburb of Syracuse, central New York. I've been here my entire professional career. I got into education and librarianship kind of I don't want to say a completely twisted way, but I my original professional goal was to go into higher ed in the student life kind of area. I worked at I worked at SUNY Purchase and Lemoyne College and William Paterson University, and my plan was to move up the ranks in student life, residence life, dean of students, those kinds of things. That was where I was my career goal, if you will, right out of college. And I did that for about 8 years, and I loved it. And I realized the farther I got up the ladder, if you will, the farther away I got from students. And then I had that moment where I said, you know what? I think I'm better with people than I am with things. So I was less good at budgets and managing, building renovation, and I was much better with leading people and ideas. So after I went that route, I said, you know what? I had already had a degree in teaching. I had a master's in education. So I had the degree and the paperwork, and I just kind of was trying something new. Don't regret it at all. It was wonderful. I learned a lot about things and myself. And then I started substitute teaching like a lot of us do. So I started in Syracuse City School District as a classroom substitute and worked in a couple years as that kind of role, and then got a position at one of the middle schools in reading. They changed the titles throughout my career, but reading support, reading lab, reading, advice, whatever it was. It was for kids that were struggling with reading, which there were a lot of kids, as there always are. The model was no different than a classroom teacher. Quite honestly, I think they took the kids who were struggling the most in each of the classes and gave them all to me. So that was a eye-opening, feel like an epic fail kind of time in my life. But again, I learned a lot. I wasn't giving up. And then fast forward, I ended up 13, 14 years as a classroom teacher in the Syracuse City
Wow.
Schools. Um, Mostly in the reading, English language arts kind of area. My last school, and the good thing about the city schools, there's 39 schools, so
Oh,
opportunities throughout the district. So um,
yeah.
it wasn't unusual for people to switch schools or switch areas. So my last, after three schools, I ended up at a K-8 school that had just added the 6, 7, and 8. And I started with a team of teachers and a administrator who had a vision for let's create a middle school. Um, and that was probably the most impactful time of my educational career because I was working with people who had ideas and out of the box thinkers. And we were in a beautiful facility. But we kind of came in as a middle school community into a lovely little K-5 program. And no surprise, they weren't thrilled to have us. By us, I mean 200 teenagers and the teachers that love them. So, but we created a program that I think was award winning in 1,000 different ways in terms of what we did with of teaching, of course, but we had predominantly, I think it was 90% Vietnamese students,
Oh,
non-English speaking students, which again, in my upbringing, that was new and different for me. Um, so I was embedded in a world that was new to me and exciting. And every day I was working with somebody who said, you know what, we could try, or why don't we do this? And probably the
when did
most,
you
Go ahead.
So when did you encounter the idea of student internships?
Yeah, well, honestly, as a classroom teacher, I worked with a colleague. His name is John. His big mission was, it's changed names over time, but outdoor education and community involvement. So he was the one who said to me, "We're not going to get anywhere with the kids if we don't develop community and put the kids in charge." And I didn't agree with him because I was so worried as a new teacher. I got to cover my curriculum and I've got to cover this. And he won me over, and I saw the impact. And we put kids in situations that, curriculum aside, which sounds probably wrong, but kids were leading in the community, kids were contributing in the community, kids were coordinating experiences in their comfort zone, out of their comfort zone. And I saw immediately that when kids are given the chance to take charge, they do if they're given that opportunity. It may take longer, it may look different than you and I would do it, but the impact and the sweat equity was so beyond worth it that I said, well, in whatever I'm doing, this is kind of how it needs to be. I need to be in a place where the kids are at the helm, which in hindsight shouldn't have been a new concept, but it went way beyond having a line leader and somebody to water the plants and that kind of stuff where kids had jobs. This was legitimate. And I can remember being in group sessions and experiences where Mr. Powers would say, "All right, you guys figure it out." And I was in agony because it would take long time for kids to troubleshoot and come up and create. And then when I watched it grow, I thought this is the way it needs to be. So,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
and I was, as a classroom teacher in this middle school, I got caught the fever, if you will, of the student leadership. And I had a principal and colleagues who were all in, like, so it wasn't hard to find people on the same team. And then we got this great, amazing idea for something we could do in the library, because of course, as an English teacher, why not? And at that time, we had some kids that were really developing as leaders. And I'd go down there and I said, "How about we do this? And we could try this." And, it's kind of pre computers. I think there were four, monitors there back in the day. And I'll never forget, I had a student called me over one time and I was, working my trying positivity and energy. And he called me over and he said, "Miss Kowalski, no offense, but she," meaning the librarian, "she doesn't care for you, and I don't think she wants us here. And I have an idea." And he had already coordinated with a public librarian and the neighboring, 2 blocks away. And he said, "So and so said we could work there if we want to." And so I thought, this is a kid who, he was not an academic kid. He didn't love school. He didn't really, that wasn't his thing. But what was his thing was seeing the human connection. And so I said to my principal, "This is awkward," and he said, "Well, try it." So off we went on a walking field trip and spent many days at the pub, which is a shame. And, on one hand, um, and then off to the public library, we went to do our projects. I don't even remember what the project was. I mean, it was not the big takeaway was that a student saw immediately we could do better. And so then a little full of myself, I said to my principal, like, "Well, I'll do that job if she leaves." And not knowing that it was a whole, I don't get mad when people say that's a degree, school librarian is a degree. I didn't know either when I was a classroom teacher. And she retired, probably half because she didn't like the middle school, but she was retiring mid-year after I was there a few years. And my principal said, "I think you got to take a class or something." So I investigated, and fast forward, I moved from upstairs to downstairs to the library, started at Syracuse University in the iSchool, and was able to start in the job while I was doing my program, which I think was more valuable than it had not been the other way. And, fueled by fire, I was in there and I said, "I can't do all this." So I embedded all the things I believed in about students taking charge into the library program, and nothing formal at the time because I kind of was spinning my wheels, didn't really know what I was doing. But whatever I was doing, there were kids as a part of it. We did portfolio conferences where we would set up events where kids would share their learning journey and their accomplishments with parents and community members and the mayor. And I mean, everything was kids at the helm. Some things failed, some things were, nope, that didn't work. And but I very seldom saw a time where it didn't impact the kids. Even if the logistics part of it, we ran out of time, we ran out of funds, whatever. But I never saw where it didn't work well for the kids. So then I was in
Oh,
that library, yeah, for 3 years, and I put them to work.
well, that's really important. So um, we often think of student librarians or the library club or
Yeah,
helpers or something, uh, where their first task is to help with the organization. But you
yeah,
flip this model. It's
yeah,
all about the students and what they're doing, and then the organization benefits from that.
yeah.
So uh,
I would say to them,
describe
what's,
that role
yeah,
to
yeah. So
to.
I said to the kids, what's not working here? Why are some kids living in fear of entering the library doors? Like, what do we got to change? Some of them had been there longer than I was. It was a K-8 school. So I asked little kids, I asked big kids, obviously different perspectives. I honestly, not that the books in order and all that stuff isn't important. I didn't really have, that wasn't my priority. My priority was creating an atmosphere where people wanted to come and be a part of it and make a difference. So honestly, I can't even say it was intentional. It was more desperation. Like I needed help and there weren't a lot of extra adults around or volunteers. So I got the kids as like kind of my idea squad and then, started putting them in different jobs. Hey, could you do me a favor? Some of them were just like ad hoc jobs. Could you run this upstairs? Could you do this? Could you think of a way we could do this? Look at the way the furniture is organized. Do you think there's a better way so that kids in wheelchairs can get in more easily? Like tons of kids didn't speak English, so I had kids that were bilingual, and I'd say, "Okay, what do I do here?" Like three kids, what I'm trying to do this. I even had kids working that we didn't speak the same language, but I think they knew that I was committed to keeping them involved. So I had kid translators, I had kids, whatever it was that was needed at the time. And it was just kind of informal jobs, to be honest. Like a kid would come in and, like, a teacher, the ones they send to the library to help, it's usually they're being antsy in their room. And more kids started coming down saying they wanted to help. And at first I was thinking, oh gosh, how can I manage this? But I really tried to embrace it because it's like think a better way to market these books. Like come up with a better way to, advertise this talent show we're doing. Like here's what I need done. You figure it out. I didn't even give them parameters. I want a sign that says this, this, and this. If you speak Vietnamese and my sign isn't resonating with other kids who speak Vietnamese, wouldn't it make sense for that student to do it? So those were kind of entry level jobs, if you will. And then I was there for 3 years in the library, and then they were making program cuts. And I was at that point low man in the library world. So I ended up leaving the district with much heavy heart, but went to another district and started in an elementary school. Was very, I want to say I was, a little discouraged for a year because I thought I left a good thing and I should have stayed put. Well, I didn't have a job, so that was a key item. But so I get to this elementary school, and I thought the one thing that fed my soul was the kids being part of the solution. And the person I was replacing at this school, no offense or insult, but very traditional, very kids don't really come in the library unless it's their class time. And, there was a lot of structure. And so I kind of kicked it up, kicked it over. Some embraced it, some didn't like. But I saw this cluster of kids that would come to school every morning for various reasons. They would get there, let's say, 10 minutes before the doors opened. And I'm looking out there thinking, oh my God, there's got to be a better way we can manage this. And I asked the principal, I said, if I put out to these kids, I got jobs from, I literally, David, I think it was from like 7:50 to 7:55 in the morning. Like that was the only time. So I said, can I start something and have these kids? She goes, well, you don't want all those kids. I said, no, I want to, have them jump through some hoops to make it happen. So again, fast forward, I started this library ambassador program. Kids applied. It was a management nightmare, to be honest, because I think I had 60 kids working each 5-minute shifts over the days. And but it took on such a life of its own. I mean, and then again, I didn't want them just straightening books. I mean, I'd say the fourth graders coming in to do this, get something ready, make the room look like it's ready for them to do, their project or whatever. But most of it was out of the library, to be honest, so they would look at the schedule and see which classes were coming in, because at that time it was a fixed schedule, and they'd see these 5 classes. They would go to the rooms, pick up the books that the kids were going to return. So then those could be available all day long, and they loved it, kids. And I got a wagon, and, they had their lanyards, and the lanyards, I think, was the game changer. Once they had a lanyard, they could conquer the world. Um, so they did that. And I had parents who would call in and say, Alicia's not going to be able to come to work today. She got a dentist appointment. And she said, and the parents were very serious. I wanted to say, oh my God, it's 5 minutes. I'll be fine. But the kids took it so seriously, then the parents took it seriously. And then that's how our library became known as a place where the kids had a role. And then we did some training nights for the Board of Education. I mean, we tried lots of different things, where the kids were teaching kids, fourth graders were teaching second graders, and, a lot of stuff that I know a lot of people do. But the lanyards and their name on a schedule is significant for them. And it was significant for me too. Um, and some kids, some were like adults. There were some kids that jump in and do what they need to do and think of things. Other kids need, like, just tell me what I need to do. And some are kind of trying to figure out what kind of worker they are. And both of those kinds have value. We just need to get them to grow. So if I'm a person who automatically kind of comes into a situation, figures out what to do, maybe my growth area is going to be, how are you going to rope other people into doing it with you? How are you going to train other people? If I'm a kid who waits at the door until you tell me what to do, well, then your learning goal is to say, you know what could I do different instead of following Mrs. Kowalski around waiting for my job? Like, how could I show more initiative instead of saying, no, you're not cut out for this? Everybody has room to grow, whatever kind of worker they are. And then again, that was 3 years I was there. And then middle school opened, and I realized that was my kind of true love. Not that I didn't like the littles, but middle school is really where my heart was. So off I went to the middle school in the same district. And now I've got these kids who are library ambassadors saying, I'm ready, so I almost had a continuum of workers and kids. And of course, I was just at one of the 4 schools. So then I started that iStaff program. I used to call it ambassadors, but I thought that became kind of like, in their mind, the elementary program. So I had to, and that was the world of when iPhones and everything was the cool thing to say. So I just took iStaff, and we brainstormed what the I stood for in terms of initiative and ideas and inspiration. And, we had a whole kind of branding process, if you will, and ended up with iStaff, and started a formal structured program where kids just didn't come and whenever they wanted. They had to apply, they had to get approved, I varied it over the years depending on what made sense, whether it was an online application or a paper or a teacher recommendation or not. I don't think I've ever landed on one solution that works for everything, but the goal was, it wasn't for everybody. Kids had to earn the right to be there. And then once they were there, they had to really step up and do things. And, you've heard my stories over the years. I inherited kids who were not being successful in their classrooms for various reasons. I had a kid who every time he walked down the hall was sobbing, and I thought, this poor guy's going to get beat up if he doesn't get it together, because you can't cry in the hall, in sixth grade boy. So I kept pulling him in and, tried to rewrite the ship there a little bit. And so fast forward, that became his every day after he finished his lunch, he came my way. And that's my Griffin that I talk about for 100 years. Then Griffin became in charge of this and in charge of that. And then basically everybody's like, associated, it was like who worked in the library. It was like Barb and me and Griffin. Like they just assumed that and he was just craving that opportunity, and it wasn't that, it was just kind of happenstance that we got connected because I didn't want him to cry. And then whatever I did, he would be a part of. I said, I'm doing ski club. He said, I'm in. I said, have you ever skied? Nope. And, he wanted to be a part of bigger things and he just needed a kind of a safe conduit into it. And that's what I had from until I left Pine Grove. The iStaff program became a group of student leaders who were recommended or initiated their opportunity to be there. It usually came out of their study hall, which we rebranded iLab so that we could kind of make the connection that in an idea lab, you do what makes sense to inspire ideas. So I had kids coming for that. And I don't think it was ever the same way with any group of kids because kids come with different talents and different specialties, different weaknesses. My schedule gets changed. So, but the commonality through all my years of doing that was that kids were the decision makers and kids were the leaders. When we first started with the traveling computer cart, that was kind of the main focus because that was the priority, getting those carts and helping kids get logged on. Fast forward a few years, nobody needed help getting logged onto a Chromebook because it was just so it didn't at the time didn't make sense that they were walking around logging in because it wasn't a need. But what there was a need for was more of back to the ambassador idea of new kids coming to the school, special events, special guests, like more of the community connectors, and helping set up for international festival, the chess tournament, those kinds of things. But what we always did is say, where are the gaps in our school community and what gaps can these kids fill? So yes, there was a heavy technology portion, I would say, when that was new, and probably less so as it became mainstream. But there was always a quest of kids, and it became part of the kind of the institution, if you will. I mean, it was built into our school improvement plan and our strategic plan that it would say leadership opportunities, and then it would list like iStaff, yearbook, student council. So it became kind of on par with the other existing organizations. And then there was a need for some after school club leadership. So those worked out well for kids who wanted to take the lead there, but didn't have a study hall during the day. So I really looked at the environment and said, what are we in need of? And I would, people knew me well enough by then that the principal would say, you know what we need? We need more fill in the blank. Or we could use a group of kids who could be part of this. And then teachers would start to ask, like, do you have any iStaff this period who could wait for our guest speaker and walk them down to the event? Do you have any iStaff kids that are available for, this and that? And I'd say braver over the years where I would say to a kid, like, what's your specialty? Like, what do you want to do? Like, if you tell me you hate making posters, then we don't need you to make a poster. But if your thing is more that, then we'll get you on that. Like, just like if you said to me, Sue, what's your thing? Like, I'm about student leadership, and it's probably less about like understanding networks and behind the scene. Doesn't mean I'm not a smart person. It's just like we all bring our gifts to the table. And that's really what my mission was, is to tap into the gifts they had. And most of the time, middle school kids, they don't really think they have any gifts, honestly, or they have any skill set, or they have any currency. And I felt like that was my role, is to help them find their worth, their currency, their game-changing approach to things, and connect the dots, because it was never the same with every kid. It was never the same with every program. Even when our building closed for 2 years, I don't know if you remember that, our building closed for renovation. 2 years we were out, and we were split amongst 6 schools. And that's when I bought RV and made it a mobile library bus. And I had iStaff kids at different locations. Her job was, I mean, weird as that. If you say, well, your job is when I pull up, your job is to help me set up the lawn chairs, and your job is, which again was kind of a logistical nightmare, but we made it work because kids wanted to be a part of it. I had a kiosk in the one building that was kind of my home school, like literally like you'd see at like an airport where they stand and take your tickets. That's what I had. And of course, I tried to make it cute with a couple little carts of books. There were kids who worked in there and like ran that operation, and they said, I'm running the library, and it was like, you know, 2 square feet. And I was like, and they said, well, how come we can't have more down here? I was like, well, where would you stand? Like, but they would check out books, they would organize books, they would make posters. And then I would say, well, I need some posters for this event at this elementary school. Can you help me with that? There wasn't even a table to make posters on, but the thing is, they just wanted to be a part of something. And not every kid. This wasn't every kid's jam, and not every kid needed it, but I just felt like it was my mission and my commitment to find the kids that needed it, that and really just, I know I say that a lot, but the connecting the dots, because sometimes what they needed was for me to say, where you'd be good is there's a program through the counselors where they go to the other school and tutor little kids. That would be your gift, because maybe they weren't into the stuff I was doing. So sometimes I was kind of like their broker, like, you know what? I don't think this is what you're looking for, but I know where you would be great. Um, and then over the years, I see kids all the time. I'm volunteering at an elementary school now. I saw one of the security guards. He said, "Are you Mrs. Kowalski from the library?" I mean, I think he's 32 or something. He said, "I used to come in." He goes, "I applied for iStaff, but I couldn't get it because I didn't have a study hall." Like, how does he remember that from, he's moved on in his life. And I see kids all the time that will, the first thing they say, "You're still doing iStaff. You're still doing iStaff." And
So
and
anyway, let's if a librarian is getting started and would like to kind of mimic your program, how would they get started and get it sustainable across time?
yeah. That's a hard thing. And I know I babble on because I get so excited about it. But I think the thing is there needs to be a healthy balance between a vision and the why and the logistics that people have to work around. So an elementary librarian who has 8 classes coming in a day is going to have different constraints than a high school librarian who has block scheduling with, flexible scheduling. So first of all, somebody needs to be take a healthy approach to what can I manage as the librarian and what can I sustain, like you said. So that's the first thing. So let's say if I'm a middle school librarian and I'm coming in and I like the concept and I like kids involved, but I'm also brand new and I don't want to get in over my head. So maybe my goal is I'm going to try and figure out 2 of my groupies that come here all the time, 3 of my groupies, and I'm going to say, you know what? Every time you guys come in here, you go right to the graphic novels. Is there any chance you'd want to be a part of that graphic novel team? So almost embrace the organic part of it as opposed to forcing it. Like, so if you've got kids which you might need to take a pause before you start an official program and say, we have an iStaff program at student leadership. We're not going to start until October. So between now and then, if you have an interest, come and kind of advocate for yourself, make a connection with me in the library. Because, starting it on day one may not be a healthy approach because you're probably not sure what you want to do as the adult, let alone telling kids. And then it becomes a source of negative energy instead of like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. If you're coming into a school where a kid did it the year prior, say, put them in charge. Like, hey, I want to get something started. I don't know where to begin. What do you think we should do? What worked when you did it last year? What didn't work? Well, last year we had too many kids and there weren't enough jobs. Or, last year we only did it 2 days a week. It should be 3 days a week or whatever. I really think for a librarian to kind of take an organic, healthy approach. I mean, organic meaning like it naturally happens, not getting into what they're eating and whatnot. But because I see that's when it fails. When somebody says, I'm going to have 20 kids every marking period and I'm going to do like Sue did. It might not work. It might not be the best fit for what is needed. And I would say a librarian's going to have to decide a model that is fits in with what their big picture goals are in the library. So that's the first thing I would do is think about, well, what do you think you could manage and where do you see a natural place that we all have groupies. Every library have a groupies that come all the time. Some are coming to escape something, some are coming to get to something. And if you develop a relationship with there, sometimes that's a good fit. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes they're there because they don't want to talk to anybody, and including you. But so that's the first thing I would do is say, all right, what could I do? What can I kind of safely manage as a starting point? And before you grow it to, ungodly, unmanageable situation. And then look, compare that to the gaps in the community, in the school community. Like, what do you think is not happening? Are there not enough kids welcoming people to school? I started that one year where I had kids going out in the morning and greeting other kids. That was a particular year where we don't know why. It was just like a pre-COVID and it was funky and we just needed some happy. So then that was a kid who suggested that. And we did that probably for 2 years. We had a welcome team. The next year, I couldn't pay a kid to do a welcome team. So I don't know. Sometimes it's the kids, sometimes it's what's going on in the world. But as a librarian and a leader in the building, I think it's up to each of us to look around and say, you know what's not happening? There isn't a way for people to see the clubs that are going on. There isn't a rotating announcement board in the lobby. There isn't, a management thing for the lost and found. It doesn't necessarily have to be a library thing. And most kids, I hate to say, they don't want to put books away. They don't want to organize books. And the ones who do have at it, but I never say you can't do it. It's not a control thing. It's just like low, like, please don't make me. Who likes to put the books away? Really, nobody. So I would say take your schedule and your priorities and match it to the gaps in the community and say to yourself, is there a way I could get a group of kids to fill that need? And could I manage it through the library so that they're still putting the library out there on the map, if you will, of a place where kids can get involved and be part of something bigger than themselves. It doesn't have to be through the library, but I think it's a great connector for libraries who are always saying, people don't understand what we do, people don't know how busy we are. Well, get into the world. I mean, work with the international festival or help the chess team, whatever it is. Because you don't want to be the duplicator. You don't want to have kids doing stuff that's already being done by somebody else. Like if there's a daily thing that gets delivered to every classroom and there's already a group of kids to do that, then take it off your list. It's done. You don't need to do it. If there's not a morning news show and you think there should be, but you also know you have a first period class then don't commit to it because it's going to be a fail and it's not going to feel good. But on the flip side, if you're thinking, you know what, like the lost and found used to bug me, had nothing to do with the library. It was just, it bugged me. So I said to a couple kids, doesn't this bug you? And so then we started this thing where they would take pictures of what was there and put it on a website. And, they took ownership of it. Did it change the world? Probably not. But did it fill a need of something that was going on? Reaching out to PTO or whatever parent group is maybe part of the community. Like, is there something we could help you with? Could we, get tickets ready? Or if there's an award show coming up, can kids stuff envelopes or fold programs or, just some of those, I guess, some hand menial tasks, but they're part of a bigger part of the community.
Right.
My superintendent, very blessed to have somebody so amazing. But to this day, she says, the library, the iStaff at Pine Grove, the iStaff at Pine, we'll have some iStaff kids do it. They're kind of like a known entity for whatever needs to be done, which I think is a great reputation for those kids to be a part of.
That's great. Sue, I think we talked about the flip
Hmm.
from what is good for the library to what is good for the kids.
Hmm.
And as you have so many years of great experiences, just tell us what your bottom line is, as the authority, I think, in uh, in doing this kind of work?
I think the bottom line is the librarian has to believe in it, because if I didn't believe in its worth, I'm not gonna go through I don't want to say hassle, but I'm not gonna invest the time into making it work. I'm probably gonna hope it fails because I can take this off my list. I think that's the one thing, is if the librarian hasn't got on the I believe in student power bus, um, I mean, that's sad to me, but that's the first thing. And like you said, if I interviewed somebody who said I probably wouldn't have kids in the library because it would disrupt, a kid's working, or because I can't trust them with the computer, I'd probably say next, but that's just me. So one thing is there has to be somebody who believes in the power of student leadership. It's got to be somebody that the person, the bottom line, has got to be confident enough to think out of the box and say, maybe it isn't in the library thing, especially places who have a small physical space. They got classes in there all day. Maybe having volunteers come in is not it's not conducive to a shared space. And maybe those kids report to the library and then they go do their business somewhere else. Maybe they work out of a kiosk in the lobby, or maybe they walk around and pick up late books. I mean, there's so many ways that the kids could play a valuable role. Um, and and then you got to find your people, which I think that's the biggest gift that librarians have, is that we get to know all the people, and
Right.
they surface and the vibe we put out, or the atmosphere we put out, the kids see right through it. They can tell if this is something you're really excited about or not. And they start coming your way. I mean, and the luxury is if you've been there a while, you have a reputation, good or bad. The bad thing is if you come in new, you may need to kind of create that groundswell again. I didn't have to create the groundswell because it was an established, my brother did it 6 years ago. My cousin did it. I want to do it. Um, so you got to be a believer. You got to be like okay with looking outside of the library and say, well, what can be done that I could make a connection between the library and somewhere else. And then while those kids are doing that, they're also eyes on the building of what's going on. Like, you're delivering books there. Well, why does she need all those books about, Greek myths? Oh, yeah, we're doing a project right now, because as well as I do, you're not going to necessarily collaborate with everybody on every project. And I can't get mad about that. But if I have a kid who knows that his teacher wants all the books on Greek mythology, then I have that connection. Like, well, what else do you think they need? Do you think we should do a bulletin board? Should we put a map up? Should we do a display in the library so for kids who come in, they can also pick them up here? So they're kind of, I wouldn't call them spies. That sounds evil, but they're eyes in the building, and they're an extra set of, they're looking at the announcements that the kids produce to go up in lunch. And if a kid says, you know what, the date for the chess tournament is wrong, I saw it up there. Can we fix it? I can't keep track of all that stuff. I mean, I do my best, but when they're invested, if they've made the announcements and they hear somebody says that was wrong, then they're like, oh, that was me. I got to fix that. Not like this anonymous, I don't know who does these announcements, but they're wrong. Um, and then what would happen is parents and community members, they just assumed anything they needed to know, they called the library. And I think that was a part of because they knew we believed in kids, because kids were talking about their role in the library, because kids were um, part of the school community as leaders. Probably at home, some mom said, well, do you know when the concert is? What time? Like, they'd call the library. And and I'd say, all right, we got 5 calls today about when the concert is. I said, there's probably some confusion. Who can make a big banner that says, reminder, concert is at 6:30 tonight? Because classroom teachers don't have that luxury of time and flexibility and not all librarians do either. But if somebody is able to manage that, like, be part of the solution, not just like, it's ridiculous that that book room is so out of control. Well, kids are organizers. Put them in the book room, and then they can say, we hated this book. Why do we read this book every year? And then I get the inside scoop. So yeah, so to get started, believe, um, search for the organic connections, connect the dots between the kid and the solution that needs to happen, and And then once you get kind of a team, then you can start to branch out. Like, you know what? The public library has asked if we can, or the local YMCA was asking if you could decorate a box. You're not going to start there. So you start with your own backyard and
Right.
then you kind of grow it from there. And I still see kids everywhere I go. Griffin, I keep in touch with him. I ended up, I had the whole family. All the kids are out of college now, and I still get a Christmas card from the family, and I still see Griffin at his job and his mother. There's a lot of kids and families that I've stayed connected to because of iStaff, and I know
Right.
that to be true.
Well, I think what a joy to be this kind of librarian
Yeah,
not who puts kids first,
yeah,
and they pay back and they
yeah,
pay back.
yeah,
And so, well, thank you so much for a
yeah,
wonderful time
yeah.
together.
And
And
again, I'm not good at short answers because I'm so excited about it and so passionate. It's hard to just give you a reasonable answer. So I apologize for that.
right. So, well, again, thank you, thank you, thank you, Sue, for a wonderful conversation.
Yep.
We hope that people will catch your vision and make a difference in young people's lives. And
Yep.
so, thank you
All
so
right.
very
Thank
much.
you.